Very long. Those of you that are just starting out, there's lots and lots of opportunities here. A few of my mentors were here in my room here. Ed Gable, is Ed still here? Ed was one of the guys that got me started, helped me fix up my very first radio. Lloyd was Aries Races when we first got started too, so I want to thank you guys. You guys helped me get started and keep me interested in the hobby, so thank you. Second of all, there's a lot, I'm gotta believe there's a lot of veterans here tonight from various services. So tonight we talk about the Military Auxiliary Radio Services. It's different. I'm not a service member, so I've got a lot of respect for all of you folks that were. You put in a lot of years, you made a lot of sacrifices, and I thank you for that. So let's give yourselves a hand, the veterans, wherever you are. Okay, we're going to try to keep it loose, keep it moving, get you all out of here at 9 o'clock. We're going to wrap it up a little bit earlier, give you time to ask some questions. A colleague of mine, Paul, KD2DO, is an Air Force Mars member. So while tonight's presentation has every effort's been made to be as agnostic, service agnostic as possible, that's not always possible. So I will speak to this hobby from a perspective of Army Mars. I am an Army Mars member. But Paul's here representing Air Force Mars, and I don't know if we have any Navy Marine Corps Mars members here tonight. Okay. Air Force Mars and Army Mars is where you want to be anyway, so I'll leave it at that. Okay, I will start this slideshow with another thing that I love to do is to kind of start with some ham humor. So I don't know if this is as visible to everybody, and the color's not so great, but I collect kind of humorous ham things. Let's face it, a lot of times there's this guy says, "Fine business, OM, it's just you and me in the glow of the tubes," and Roger, OT, since we lost the house and Nancy divorced me, I got a lot more time for ham radio. Let's see what the next one says here. It's coming up. This is a Dilbert one. "If I left engineering and became a manager, would I be as sexy as I am now, Liz? I think it would decrease your sex appeal by 17%, but that's just a planning number. What if I got my ham radio license to compensate for the loss? Look at my arm, goosebumps." Guys, you'll understand this. This one says, 73, old man, I must really sign now. I really must sign him. My dinner was ready 15 minutes ago, and if I don't come home and get it, my gorgeous, very patient ex-whale is going to feed it to the dog. This one says, Edgar is in contact with everyone but me. Ham. This one's got a lot going on, but basically it says, pity the amateur radio operator who they get blamed for everything. Up here is the, maybe that's why my washer's been over sudsing. Maybe that's why the fuse in my garage blew. That's another one. SSO, SSO, SSO. I wonder what that means. S. Morse inventor, today's demonstration of the telegraph. No offense to your dots and dashes, Mr. Morse, but how much can I ever do with just a binary code? This one here. It says, it's Guglielmo, you idiots. The only reason why Marconi invented wireless broadcasting was to teach people how to pronounce his first name. That's Guglielmo Marconi. And this one says, no, Greg went to the ham auction this afternoon to get rid of a couple old radios. They were cluttering up the place. Oh, I think I hear him pulling in now. And this one says, I don't care if Division doesn't send QFL cards colder up. Get on that radio. So, keeping with the military theme. We'll talk about the Military Auxiliary Radio System. I'm Ross Mazzola, KC2LOC, and I am the U.S. Army Mars New York State Emergency Operation Officer. And again, at the end, if you want to learn a little bit more about what we do, we'll talk about it. There we go. So Mars has got a long history. Longer than me. In 1925, it started as the Army Amateur Radio System, and it was formed to continued until World War II suspended the operations. 1946, kind of got authorization to resume names. In 1948, it changed again. The Military Affiliate Radio System was created, and at that time, that's when the separate services were created. Army Mars and Air Force Mars programs were created. 1962, Navy Marine Corps Mars launched, and now it became truly a joint service program. During the Korean War, Vietnam War, and Gulf War, Mars was mostly known for Marsgrams. And some of you may have, has anybody sent or received the Marsgram in the room? Yeah, oh, look, quite a few. They were what created and what allowed that communication to happen before internet, before computers, before cell phones. In 2009, the program's name was changed to the Military Auxiliary Radio System from Military Affiliate Radio System. So you may be asking yourself, what's the difference between, Bill mentioned emergency communications. That happens to be one of the things I enjoy about the hobby. What's the difference? There's lots of real good amateur MCOM programs at amateur radio. You've got the Aries group, you've got Saturn, you've got the RACES groups, you've got the National Traffic System, you've got Skywarn programs with National Weather Service. So what makes Mars different? First and foremost, Mars, unlike those other civilian services, come under the auspices and command and control of the U.S. Department of Defense. So we really are, my badge here says United States government. So it really is an authorized group of volunteers that fall under the auspices of the U.S. Department of Defense. One of the things that makes this probably more unique for us radio amateurs is the fact that Part 97 rules really don't apply to when we're operating as Mars operators, right? So it's not like I can ignore all the everything else because I got a badge. That doesn't work that way. But while you're operating as Mars, we get to operate on frequencies outside of the amateur allocations. So that's kind of neat. What it does require you to do is to mod your radio, and that I remember the first time I opened up my case and I had to do it. Usually they're pretty simple mods, but I remember, boy, that was scary, because I'm a new guy. If I messed up, I'd have to send it to Ed. And Ed would say, hey, dummy, next time bring it to me first. But I was able to do it, and it was so neat. So the things you get, obviously, is you get some quiet space. There's nobody else on it unless he's one of your people, somebody in the Mars services. And so it's pretty neat. We get those frequencies, voice and digital. So you could operate voice digital. There's not the things that we have here where this portion of the band is for just digital, this portion of the band is for CW, this portion's for voice. We could do anything we want on these assigned channels and on these frequencies. Another thing that's unique compared to amateur service is we have offline encryption. Encryption in amateur service, you know, is a no-no. With Mars, at least in the Army Mars services, we are using offline encryption. So we have messages. The messages get either created by us or received by us. We put it through this piece of software. It creates all these code groups, and out it goes again over the air. So even somebody was able to read it. It comes out in plain. And you'll see words, you'll see codes and letters, groups, and that's decoded at the other end. So that's kind of unique with Mars. Station licenses and call signs are issued by Mars. So in addition to my ham license, we also have Mars licenses. So mine happens to be Alpha Alpha Romeo 2 Bravo X-Ray is my normal call. And I have a billet call, which is an officer call, is Alpha Alpha Mike 2 Echo November Yankee. So the Echo is for the emergency coordinators, November Yankee for New York. So each state in the Union has emergency coordinators, and they have a similar call. Paul's, yours is AF2 in the Air Force. They start with, Army starts with A, Air Force starts with AF, thankfully, and Naval Marine Corps is with N. Your call is?
AFA2 DO.
AFA2 DO. Did you get to pick the DO? Because it matches your other call?
Took it off my,
off your license, okay. So they're a little nicer, they're a little easier to remember. In the Army Mars case, they just give you a number and that's what you get, and you'll live with it. So, and lastly, probably more interestingly, is OPSEC. OPSEC is operational security. And that's one of the things that's driven into us in all the Mars services. And the part that's a little bit different is that it just makes you a lot more conscious about what you say, what kind of information is okay to disseminate, even to other radio amateurs that aren't Mars. And the whole idea is for security. We do transmit messages from National Guard units, from, you guys are Air National Guard bases, and so the idea of security is there. Little things that don't mean a lot, like locations are pretty sensitive to us, like names are pretty sensitive to us, so we really try to avoid that kind of stuff. And the reason is because if somebody's listening that we don't want to listen in, namely an enemy, they may be able to extrapolate pieces of information from what we're talking about, names, locations, numbers of people, and that's one of the things that's a no-no in the military, and they drive that into us as Mars as well. Yes, Timmy?
Offline encryption standard with Army and Air Force?
I don't think we're quite there yet, right? Are you guys using offline encryption yet?
don't really think so. Not
Yeah.
that I know of.
So one of the things we'll talk about a little bit here is that there's attempts being made, I see it from where we are, to kind of join the services together, make them more. We're now doing joint exercises. We weren't allowed before. We're allowed now to be on each other's nets and to check into other nets and participate on the other services nets. So I see that coming, and little by little, this encryption may creep into these other services. So the offline encryption that I talked about, Timmy, was Army Mars. Army Mars. You're welcome. So as I said, there's a lot of people involved, about 5,000 people involved. There's lots of different programs. So you got Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps. Our group is assigned to the NetCom 9th, and that's out of Fort Huachuca in Arizona. And what we do is we provide worldwide emergency communication services during times of need. As I just mentioned a moment ago, there's this effort underway at the highest levels to try to combine services. You see a lot of joint service operation in the real military, and they're trying to do the same thing with the military auxiliary as well. So try to put people together, try to make us more interoperable, try to get us involved. In other words, last year I had the opportunity to attend a conference that was in, what's that base, Paul, in Pennsylvania? Do you remember?
Fort Indiana Town.
Fort Indiantown Gap.
Indiantown.
Fort Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. Great people over there, got to meet them, and it's one way that we start working this interoperability piece. Our Mars mission really is the same thing that you find in a lot of other areas. The difference is we primarily support DoD components, things like National Guard units, active release units. Let's face it, somebody was asking me earlier, do they even really need you anymore, right? Here's the U.S. military and other militaries. Super, but that was yeah, good tip. So, and I used to work for Harris, and you say, well, what do you do? There's some amazing equipment that the U.S. military has, but there still is the belief, and this is kind of reassuring to us as amateur radios, even with this world superpower having access to everything, there's still an understanding and an acknowledgement that when all else fails, you got amateur radio. So they still believe it. They make a significant investment in our programs. So that's pretty neat that they still think that. Our primary mission, providing health and radio communications to the military, to civilians employed and contractors of the DoD, civil agencies. One of the things that, this is something new, radio-only communications. You would think that in this day and age, they're talking about internet and this and that. One of the things that's been driven down to us in Army Mars is the focus on away from internet and onto radio only. Wherever we can, they want radio only, radio only, radio only. They want interoperability between the Mars services, and eventually there'll be those links to figure out what we're going to do with other people that aren't Mars and how to interact that. In my case, I consider myself lucky because I can work with the Mars folks and I can be liaison with the local Ares folks. And so you can kind of see how that could work. If there was some disaster of major proportions, National Guard units are rolling into town, I can operate as a Mars member both our Ares races frequencies and support our local people here, and then provide that link through Mars into other areas and into those National Guard units. So that's kind of neat. Some Mars, other couple things, communications have to be sustainable on emergency power. I just brought a little field kit here that I put together. It's just something that I like to do. Almost all the radio amateurs have some kind of emergency power available at homes. And some stations, like I said, are easy to transport. All right, so what do we do? Who knows this guy? Does anybody know these guys? This guy, everybody knows. Remember this? Sergeant Carter. Surprise, 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 Gomer used to say. So, I'm dating myself, yeah. I was just a little kid watching TV, watching that stuff. We do a lot of training and practice in military auxiliary radio service, both in Air Force Mars, Navy Marine Corps Mars, Air Force Mars. The way it starts is, if you become a member, you get a basic training manual. And in that basic training manual, it walks you through all the stuff that you get in basic training. We have operating procedures, lots and lots and lots, in the Army we do anyways, lots and lots of operating procedures. And there's a procedure for everything. There's a procedure to write this kind of message. There's a procedure to ask for lunch. There's a procedure for this. It's very, very regimented, very formatted. But with good reason, because those are exactly the same procedures that in most cases, they train the service members using the same procedures. You'll be exposed to weekly, bi-weekly, daily training nets, and we'll talk about that. So if you want to get on the radio, you want to operate, there's nets. I know in the Army, there's 3 in our region, there's 3 nets a day, every day of the week. So you can be on the radio as much as you want. Paul, in the Air Force, what do you guys have?
2.
2 nets a day. If you want to operate, HF, this is the place to be. You'll get these scheduled nets, quarterly exercises, anywhere from 4 to 48 hours. We ran one 48-hour one about a month ago. Air Force has got one coming up 10 hours in length. So these are lengthy exercises. They're designed to kind of replicate what would happen in the real world. And they're not expecting you to be on the air necessarily for 10 hours, but with enough members, people pick up shifts, people come in, they check in, they grab messages, you move on to the next thing. So it really simulates what goes on in the real world. And no drill sergeants and no PT for any of you that's worried about joining up one of these services and having to do that. Primarily the modes that we operate is HF. There's some areas that work VHF repeaters, dedicated VHF repeaters. In the Albany area in New York State, they have one, simplex. But in most places, they don't. I don't know, Air Force Mars, do you guys have?
Yeah, we've got a repeater out there.
Syracuse?
It's on the east side.
Of Rochester or of Syracuse?
East side of Syracuse.
He's right, yeah. And the reason for that, Paul will talk about a little bit later, they've got some base support that they're involved with. Most of the modes are SSB voice, so there's still a lot being done by voice. Because of the length of messages and the type of messages, just like everything else, folks are moving over to digital. Pactor, Winmore's views, and the sound card modes, Olivia, MT63. And this other mode that probably a lot of people haven't heard about is called Mil Standard M110A. It's the mode, and you guys know a little bit about that. They're hardware modems that the military uses. It's kind of a workaround that allows us to not have those multi-tens of $1,000 modems, but be able to talk to these teletype systems that are set up through these modems on the military end. And it's done as sound card mode. So if you have if you've got a Tigertronics, if you've got a PK232, whatever you've got that's got maybe with a built-in sound card, if you've got sound card modes, you'll have access to this piece of software, and with that piece of software, you can send this particular mode, digital mode. And CW. CW is used, I know here in this area, there's a few people that on the Mars side, Army Mars side, that still work CW. There's one on the Army Mars side. In our region, there's one CW net. Air Force Mars? No, none of that. I think that may just be effective, either the transmission time, or more so probably people that know it. I mentioned earlier that we operate on frequencies that are just outside the amateur bands. And we'll operate across the whole thing. And what I've found is that's great, and that's also a problem for me. I live in a place that's pretty antenna challenged. And our nets are primarily running evening times around 4 megahertz, 5 megahertz, somewhere in that neighborhood. And Air Force Net runs around the same time for an evening net. Evenings and intercontinental nets, we'll talk about that, they're up running 12, 13, 14 megahertz range for theirs. So it's hard to get an antenna and a system that works great across everything. We try to operate interregionally, and then there's some other things. Ideally, the guys that do the best are ones with multiple antennas, directional antennas, so they can talk within New York State, New Jersey, in the Army Mars case, and then they can also point their beam towards Arizona and pick up messages from out there. So I can't do that, but that's where you get a lot of practice with relays. If I can't do that, somebody else can hear it, pick up that message, bring it to our net within our region, and then we could disseminate that message locally. So it's a lot of fun. Talking about those nets, we do meet on a regular basis, as I said, at least 3 times a day, sometimes more. Lots of different types of nets. In our case, once a week we have administrative and command nets. That's where our director of our region, and I'm the region that's New York, New Jersey, that's called Region 2. He'll get on the air, and all the other staff members will get on the air, and anybody else that's in Mars in our region will get on the air as well. And that's where we hash out whatever those details are, kind of like the business portion of our meeting. Hey, we got this exercise coming up. Do we have enough coverage? Hey, this new procedure came out. Make sure you pass that along and everybody gets what they're supposed to get out of it. That kind of. There's traffic nets that are designed. In our case, there's a couple of nets that happen a couple times a week where you're passing traffic from New York to Oregon, or Rochester to Hawaii, or it's limitless wherever you want to go. There's traffic handling nets. There's emergency nets that can come up and can be stood up whenever that needs to be, and there's exercises that do that. Technical and training nets. Air Force Mars has excellent, excellent training nets. Better than Army Mars, I would say. They do a great job with the digital stuff. They do a great job with their training. They do a real good mix of hands-on training and operational training on the radio. They do broadcast little snippets of information where they relay some information that way. And they just do a really, really good job with training nets. And there's lots of folks that are able to help. The one downside with Army Mars is the members are generally spread apart. Bill and I, Bill's also an Army Mars member. Bill and I, we've got about 4 or 5 here in the Monroe County area that are Army Mars members. Air Force Mars, you've got about Western New York, maybe half a dozen, something like that. Yeah. So we're kind of spread apart, and that makes it a challenge to do the hands-on stuff, to do the personal stuff, for me to come over to your house and say, hey, let me help you out with that. I know one of the tough transitions has been, like with a lot of other services, to transition to digital stuff and setting up computers and setting up software. In a lot of times in this day and age, you've got to be just as much a computer operator and know your way around that as you do with the software piece. And I know that's a challenge for any member, somebody that's not computer literate. We have these joint service interoperability nets. Once or twice, is it twice a week now that we do the Whiskey Zero Oscar nets, or
I'm not sure.
interoperability nets? So there are these nets within the Mars services, and even there's a CFARS. The CFARS is the Canadian Forces Amateur Radio Service, kind of like the equivalent of Mars. That's once a week, and they rotate between who's got net control for that. They do a Mars service does net control one week, and the next week it's the CFARS members. And so it's really, we're operating with those other countries even in terms of operability. And we operate those in voice and digital phones. Any questions? Okay, yeah, Timmy? Sorry, bud.
You still have enough traffic to pass with all, with your internet and email and texting and everything that people do? Do you still have enough traffic to pass?
Tim, the honest answer is the traffic that we pass today, is, with the exception of drills and exercises, is 99.999999% simulated. Okay. So in the Army, what we're required to do is we're required to pass messages. So we have requests for information, formatted messages, we have response style messages, we have weather observation report messages, and so every time you get on a net, part of our job, part of our expectation is we craft a message and we send it, just like we would a real message. And so somebody might send, so if you're an Army Mars member, you might send me a message. You say, hey, I've got a message for Alpha Romeo 2 Bravo X-ray. I get the message, I decode it, and it says, how far are you away from Port of Rochester to your location? Great. And then I'll send that message back to you. It goes back to you. So we try to simulate real traffic. But the reality is, we hardly, I've never passed a piece of, Paul, have you ever passed a piece of real traffic from anybody yet?
Just head counts from the nets.
There you go. Yeah, just head counts and stuff like that. So I said this when I'm doing Aries racing stuff too. Sometimes you feel a little bit like the Maytag repairman. And yes, Sabrina, I'm dating myself with that too probably. You don't know the Maytag repairman. A little bit, yeah. So sometimes you do that. So you keep busy, you keep practice, you do these other things. In real nets though, one of the fun parts is you hear somebody with a tactical call sign come up onto the net asking for information or sending a radio. There's, on the Army Mars side, I talked about encryption, there's messages that we get that everybody has something called, there's the ability to translate different levels of security on these messages. There's messages that come through from some of these tactical call signs that we can't decode. And we don't even know who to send it to. And basically they're just kind of sending it out to see if we get it, and we just report the receipt of message number 17. It's really tough to roger a message like that, especially when there's code groups, but you do the best you can and you get that message and you know you got it, and they got it through. And then they may say, take this message from here and get it to there, and you don't know what went in it, what they're asking you to do, but you're not supposed to. So that's how we operate with those messages. Did I answer you?
Yeah.
Tim?
Back back in the 60s and 70s, I know
I wasn't there, but go ahead.
a lot of people got into Mars because you could get surplus equipment.
Gone.
No more. Huh?
No more.
Okay.
We don't have it more. I don't think Air Force Mars has it. Yeah, I think that those days are gone. I don't know for how long gone, but yeah, that's not the reason what to join. So if you're thinking you're going to get some cool radio stuff, you're not going to get any.
Yeah.
Okay. You can get the surplus equipment.
Oh, you can.
Air Force anyhow.
Oh, okay. So Paul, talk to that guy over there. He may know where to get some good stuff.
Let me know.
There you go.
Okay.
See? So this isn't unlike the real Army where this side doesn't know what this guy's doing either. Yeah. Getting back to here, so we're organized by regions. Air Force Mars is set up this way. Navy Marine Corps Mars is set up that way. I'm in Region 2, which is New York and New Jersey. There's another guy that runs the emergency coordinating side in New Jersey. We're kind of a busy state because we have a lot of targets in New York, New Jersey area. And so as a result, we get regularly exercise, we get a lot of information about things, and we need to really stay at the ready because we are. There's some other folks in other areas. Region 1 has some targets in it too. You got the city of Boston. Almost anywhere you go, there's likely targets there, likely threats that could affect those targets, either natural stuff or man-made stuff that we practice for and we're ready for. There are these inter-region traffic routing nets. Not unlike national traffic system, we take messages from the region, from a station to a state net, to a region net, up to a CONUS net, and then it can go back down all the way through this multi-layered approach. Not really unfamiliar to a lot of you. I talked about digital messages. Here's just a couple of plain dress messages, one that's just plain text. There's some kinds of information that we're allowed to send out in plain text. Hey, what is this one here? I'm trying to think. This was a request for information. Hey, you got to tell me your hours of availability on Saturday, February 8th. That's okay. There's not a whole lot of high priority stuff in that. That can go out as plain dress. As code dress message, this is kind of an idea of what a message would look like with the various code groups, how it comes out with the message header. Notice I've redacted the message headers in both of these messages because they're specific to certain areas and certain places, and conceivably somebody with enough practice and with receiving enough of these can kind of figure out who's sending it and where it's going to, and my bosses by chain of command doesn't want people to do that. So that's why that's covered up. Digital came up, and you'll see there's 3 columns. And I'm a little disheartened in the fact that there's 3 columns, but I'm also encouraged by the fact that there's efforts being made to make this 1 column. And what I'm talking about here is that not all branches today use the same digital standards. There's a little bit of overlap starting, but obviously that's a problem, right? You can't have, Air Force uses 1,000, right? For MT-63, your MT-63 1,000? Could be 2,000? 2,000? Good. Then that looks like this is something that's changed over to what other services are doing. And there's these little gaps in there. Interoperability is a work in progress, but a lot of headway is being made there. A lot of headway.
Is there any interface to real Army or Air Force units? Do they interface on your frequencies, or is it strictly all amateurs?
No, like I said, 99.9% of the time, it's amateurs in Mars services. These guys, and I'll let, when I get to those slides on the Air Force Mars slides, these guys actually have base support teams, which are pretty cool. They actually get to go on base. Army doesn't do that, right, Paul? Yep. So another thing that Air Force Mars does that Army Mars doesn't do a lot of, and not really well at it, is phone patch nets. So you guys run phone patch nets in the Air Force. Phone patch is something you guys are familiar with. Paul, do you want to say a word about the phone patches? Do you do it yourself? Are you a phone patch capable station?
I don't have a steerable beam,
Okay.
so I'm not allowed to. But one of my friends does, and he handled the phone patch of during the Super Bowl. There was a flyover, and the pilots in those planes just wanted to send a message back home saying we're ready as soon as they let us know.
There you go.
And so he was talking to the pilots on those planes. Really? The phone patch.
So Tim, we get it. We're prepared to do it, but it's few and far between. Base support teams. This is another thing that Army Mars doesn't do. But here in this area, the Air Force Mars members are really lucky. They get to go to Syracuse area, and the base is...
Griffiths?
No, Tibby said Griffiths, but it's, what is...
Hancock Field.
Okay.
The 174th Air Wing. We've got a base with a Mars station there. And there's about 5 of us that show up every month during training weekend.
And so they have an opportunity to go on base, real base, interface with the other folks that are there on base, and do your drills and your exercises right from there, right?
Yep, and eat lunch.
And eat lunch. I'm sure it's a delicious lunch. Delicious lunch. Another thing that Air Force Mars does is involved on the shares HF radio side. Paul, are you involved in that piece of it? Yeah, neither am I. But the Air Force Mars participates in that. Army Mars doesn't. Air Force Mars, oh, what's shares? Yeah. It's the, it operates under the auspices of this Department of Homeland Defense, Department of Homeland Security, yeah. And it's another one of these things. I'm not that familiar with it, to be honest. Anybody know much about shares? Yeah, so it's a super secret program. The other thing that Air Force Mars does more than Army Mars is deploy and actually send people out. Folks in Air Force Mars were involved in 2010 in operations in Haiti. They got to go there. They set up operations. They assisted our men and women in the military there. A little bit more here. I wish the pictures aren't quite as good, and I'm sorry here. Something's on the projector side or on the computer side. They're not really talking really nice. But operating phone patches. They had an HF WinLink message relay involved, and it was a joint effort too. You had some Army guys there, some Air Force guys there, and it was truly a joint operation. It doesn't happen a lot, but this is one of those times where it really came together. Here's Navy Marine Corps Mars. There's not, I've only run across 1 or 2 Navy Marine Corps Mars members in our area up here in New York. And so they do similar things. They're on the air, maybe a little bit less than us, but I do hear them from time to time. And here's a case where they got to go to Hawaii and do some work. Not a bad assignment. Now, membership. So if by now it's piqued your interest, let's talk about membership. There are different types of membership in the Mars services. There's an individual membership, which if you were interested, that's what you'd do. There's also club memberships, auxiliary memberships, and military unit memberships. So different bases throughout the state, at least again I'm talking about Army Mars, are assigned. They have official Mars stations without actually having necessarily an amateur radio guy there.
Do you have to put in a certain number of hours to maintain your membership?
Tim, you are great. Yes, you do, sir. You saw the slide. The slide says, here's what you need to do. Here are the requirements. Good. Tim did not see this before we started. All right, so what do you have to do? Young man over there, you've got, when you're 17 with your mom's signature, you could become an Army Mars member. So think about it. You got a few years to think about it. You have to be a U.S. resident or a resident alien. You've got to at least have a general class license. Or in the Army Mars service, you can join as a tech, get on those bands. Remember, they're not FCC-controlled bands, but you've only got a year to upgrade. Some of you, the way you've gone in here, I know from one meeting to the next, you raise your hand, yep, I just upgraded, yep, I just upgraded. Or I went in and took all 3 tests in one day, so you'd have no problem with it. There is a national basic training course. You've got to complete the FEMA classes, and these are the same classes that you need to complete if you're a member of our local Aries Races group. You have to have internet connection. Now, a few slides ago I said we're trying to be radio only. The reason for the internet connection is they still need a quick and easy way to get information to you. You got to get these paper documents and procedures out to this widely dispersed membership. And internet is still the way to get that stuff out. In the Army Mars service, what they do is you get an email message that's encoded or encrypted. And we've got another piece of software that takes that message, whatever it is, and we got to run it through this other piece of software. Then you could open it up and say, oh, it's a PDF of a procedure. Oh, it's a PDF of this. Oh, if it's something of that. It's a link to this. It's a spreadsheet for that. So even our documents come to us encoded on the Army Mars side. I think Air Force, you guys aren't quite doing that yet. Is that right? Yeah. HF radio, you need to ideally run anywhere between 2 and 30 megahertz, but again, you're going to be limited by your radio, by your tuners, by your antenna system, by your own abilities as an amateur operator. Tim, to answer your question, 15 hours of participation per quarter, and that's pretty similar to the other services. You know, they want you to be on the radio. You need to be involved. In the amateur radio service, in Army Mars, we have to serve NCS once a quarter, at least. There's some guys that are on every night. Some of the retired guys, they're running their net, the 5 o'clock net, they're on every day. And they like it, and they're great at it. They're fantastic at it. You've got to maintain a station log. You've got to participate in 2 exercises. Usually we have 4 within each service, and there's these inter-service exercises that you can participate in. And 2 exercises, I restated myself, sorry about that. Equipment requirements, you got to have a good HF radio that's capable of out-of-band operations. So you need to be able to mod your radio if it has any limitations on it. Have to have a good antenna coupler. Again, this is one of my challenges at my home station, is I can get most of the places where I need to be, most of the frequencies where I need to operate, but my little inverted V antenna does great for covering New York. It does great for covering the Northeast. But when they say, here's a message coming in from Arizona, I can't do very much with it. So you need at least 100 watts. You don't have to. Interesting story. When was our interdiction exercise? In June. Monroe County Aries Races did a Northern Border interdiction exercise. Maybe some of you guys heard it or saw it on the news. I was there. I was running an HF station so that we could talk to New York State Races headquarters in Albany. And I set up a schedule with another Army Mars member downstate on Mars frequencies. And I was running this little radio here, this FT817, 5 watts. Granted, he was listening for me at a certain time. Granted, he's the guy that can talk anywhere because he's got this giant antenna farm. But we actually had a contact. We were able to pass a message from Port Rochester, where I was, to his station downstate, down north of New York City. And we did that with 5 watts. I don't recommend it. It was tough. But 100 watts is, if you're thinking about a radio, just a standard 100 watt. You don't need amps. A lot of guys run amps, but you don't need them. You'll need a computer with a digital sound card interface, because that's to handle all those sound card modes. Here's the Army Mars station at Hancock Field. Again, I'm sorry that the pictures didn't come out real well. Paul's been there. After here in a few minutes, you'll be able to talk to Paul, and he can give you the specifics about what they've got there. You actually have a dedicated radio room there, right?
Yeah, we've got our own little room. We've got 2 HF rigs, and VHF, and our choice of 4 different antennas.
So that's great. So for our region, Region 2, our kind of hardened bunker is down in New Jersey. So that doesn't make it convenient for me to just kind of trucks down and participate like Paul can up here. So if you really want to get involved on that kind of thing, maybe Air Force Mars is your cup of tea. Here's another station up in, this is in Schenectady, New York. And you see, this was, I think, Paul, you sent me these pictures. These are from a couple of years ago, I think.
Yeah.
Right? Where they kind of set up yeah, an interesting antenna support. And you got the comfy chairs over there at the operating station. That may have been improved by now. So why join? For me, there's a lot of enjoyment in the radio hobby. You can become part of this worldwide communication system. You operate on these specialty frequencies that not everybody's on. That's kind of neat. You can affiliate with the service branch of your choice. So maybe you were in the Navy, maybe you were in the Marine Corps, maybe you were in the Air Force or the Army. You can kind of get back into that service without having to march around and shoot anybody. And you participate in these regular discipline nets. For me, as a new amateur, that's one of the things that I think I've probably been most grateful at, is I've learned a lot about propagation. I've learned a lot about protocol, and I think I've become a better amateur radio operator as a result of my involvement in Mars. So today, Mars involves lots of different people. Men, women, young folks, the cadets, different kinds of activities. That's from our Hamfest last year down there. The commander who's based out of Albany came here to Rochester, and we had a little booth. We want you. Just the Hamfest wants you more. Just so I'll put another word for that. If you're interested in a Hamfest and volunteering for that, we need you there too. But between now and the Hamfest, and when you're not working on the Hamfest as a volunteer, we want you. Army wants you, Navy Marine Corps wants you, Air Force Mars wants you. If you want more information, I'm Ross, KC2LOC, and I'm here to represent Army Mars. Paul Conaway is here to represent Air Force Mars. We both live in the area, so we can both kind of give you our perspective of what those different services involve. It's not a competition. It's just maybe a matter of whatever you like to do, who you may be friends with, and what you want to do more. So that was a quick, I'm a couple minutes over my goal here of leaving you 15 minutes to answer questions, but that's Mars Today. I thank you for your attention. Are there any questions before we turn the lights back on?
Just a quick question.
Oh, yeah, Tim?
Possibly you could give us the frequency of a very active net, just in case we wanted to listen in, just to see what it sounds like.
Listen between, most evenings, between 4 and 5 megahertz, right?
All right.
Yeah, I think that's about the best I could do for you.
All right.
Yeah, Paul, go ahead.
There's no reason we can't give out the frequencies.
We can't. My orders are not to. I'm going to have to shoot to kill you if you do. No, you can do whatever you want with you. Yeah, we can't.
But I thought it was the frequency designator
Oh, coupled with the other one?
coupled with the frequency.
Maybe my commander might be a little more strict.
Okay.
But yes, so listen just above 4 megahertz. Well, I'll cut that down. 4 to 4.5 megahertz.
Okay.
Right? Will you be on in there? Are you on that in that neighborhood? Somewhere in there, Tim.
All right.
We're a little over 5.
Okay, so there you go.
problem.
So that's the general vicinity where you could listen in, and there'll be some activity, usually after 7 o'clock.
Okay.
And there's another hint for you, between 7 o'clock and a little bit. Tim?
Since you have access to encryption and decryption keys, do you do a background or security clearance?
There is. On Army Mars there is. And yeah, I guess other services may not be using that, yes. But yes, so in Army Mars there is. And there's different levels of keys. They're called different code keys, kind of to decrypt things into this software. And then in addition to that, those keys roll. So they don't stay out there forever, kind of like passwords. So if you became a member and then you decided to leave, shortly afterwards you get another set of keys, and they're different. Their keys are used for different purposes, different types of information. Ralph?
Do you interact at all with the Coast Guard Auxiliary or the CAP? Or
Yeah, we haven't as Army Mars. Maybe Navy Marine Corps might. We haven't, and I haven't heard them. Civil Air Patrol or Coast Guard. Paul, do you guys have you been on the air with anybody from that?
Two of our base support team are ex-CAP members, but there's no real interplay.
Yeah, there's no interaction between Mars and Coast Guard Auxiliary.
Oh, your Coast Guard? Okay, there you go. We can. No reason why we couldn't.
Coast Guard net runs on 14,300 on Saturdays just before the Maritime Mobile net.
There you go. Great. Ed, you had a question?
when you're listening to those secret frequencies
Yep.
at 4 megahertz and above, would that be upper sideband?
Yes.
Just fucking-
Yes. Oh, that's right. See, you know. One of the things, I don't know if I failed to mention it. There's this broad area, but Mars services operate on assigned frequencies, almost like channels. So the reason that didn't come to mind is because I programmed my radio so that I can go from channel XYZ to 427 to whatever it is. And I've frankly lost track of what those are. I've got them on paper, but that lets me get from one frequency to another when you've got to change from here to there.
Sure.
Yeah, but it's upper sideband.
Upper sideband, okay.
Yep, upper sideband, that's right. Sorry, Tim. Thank you for bringing that up. Anything else?
Do they do any experimentation with frequency hopping or anything like that? Especially
Yeah, there's ALE. There's a version of ALE. It's called Mars ALE, which is a type that runs on a PC. I'm not there yet, and I guess you need. Do you guys know? You know ALE, but do you know anything about the PC side of it?
No, other than the fact that it works fairly well when it does work well. When it doesn't work well, it sucks.
I have some of my former colleagues from Harris. PC ALE. You guys ever used it?
I haven't.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be the standard Bell standard. Supposedly it should interact
Yeah.
with military radios, but I haven't tried it.
So I think there's an effort to try to do that just because you can't get that kind of equipment out to all these stations.
Is it still the 7210 version of ALE?
Yeah, it's still standard. What's the
7210
software?
coding?
I believe, yeah, it's designed to do that. They have made some progress, there's dedicated ham volunteers that are also really great programmers that are trying to develop this stuff so that we can run equipment and software on our computers to be able to mimic and replicate, at least be able to talk at some level with some of these other hardware stuff.
The military's not running ALE anymore, they're running 3G.
See? You can't keep up.
ALE is too slow.
You can't keep up. Gary, you had a question?
Yeah, so in the evenings when I listen to phone patches on 11.175, is that Mars or is that something within the Air Force?
It's not Army Mars. Does that ring a bell with you, Paul?
Yeah, every night, phone patches.
What language?
Does it sound Ukrainian or Russian at all? No? Okay.
It's English and it's pretty active.
Yeah.
But it's not Mars as far as you guys know.
Not,
Well, I don't know about the phone patch net.
Okay.
I can find out in a little while.
and even though I've got that fancy title, I'm like a Private Gomer Pyle. He outranks me. Anything else? Yeah. Well, again, thank you for your attention. Thank you for coming out and listening to this program. I hope I explained a little bit to you about what what Mars is today. And if you got any question, I'm hanging out for a little while. Paul's hanging out for a little while.
Show and tell.
Oh, and I got to show and tell. Yeah, this is not a requirement. This is just because of stuff that I like to do. I'm one of those guys that can be deployed. So these are kind of my grab and go kits. If I have to go someplace, I'm ready to set up. I also happen to dabble on the side. I like this concept of solar and being able to stay sustained for a longer period of time. This helps me keep that little battery charged. I've got bigger batteries, so I've got a bigger solar panel to do that. John?
I'm not sure we got it from your story, Ross, but you grabbed and went to the Port of Rochester for that drill.
Yeah,
With that stuff. and
with this stuff.
Running and talking to wherever it was in
Yeah.
an hour or two. And it was-
Yeah, it's pretty neat. So I again, this other hobby, not that my wife says I've got too many already, but this other piece of it here with the Spar stuff gives me a chance to practice my stuff. It gets me a chance to get out, gets me a chance to get on the air, gets me a chance to practice the craft. And the only way you get better at it is through practice, practice, practice. So, good night. Thank you. Come back next month. Sign up for the Ham Fest. Talk to Paul or I, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you all in April.